The Lonely Tree, Chapter 1. The wind moved swiftly through the trees, carrying with it the scents of flowers, damp earth, and moss. Leaves rustled high above the forest floor, branches creaked against one another, and birds called from hidden places among the distant trunks. Beneath those sounds, insects hummed, and small creatures shifted through the grass. One fateful day, the wind carried something different, a small, lonesome seed. It drifted between the trees, spinning through the warm air, before being swept out over the edge of the forest. For a while, it traveled above the tall grass, rising and falling with every change in the wind. Then the breeze weakened. The seed dropped lower and lower until it landed softly in a patch of loose earth near the middle of a wide meadow. For a time, it lay beneath the soil in silence. Days passed. Rain seeped into the ground, and the earth warmed beneath the sun. At last, the seed cracked open. A thin root pushed downward while a pale green stem pressed upward, forcing its way through the soil. The grass parted around it as the new sprout slowly emerged. When it finally reached the open air, it had only 2 small leaves. The sprout stood low among the grass, barely taller than the blades surrounding it. It had no idea where it was or what it was meant to become. It only knew that it had awakened alone. Above it stretched a bright blue sky. Sunlight rested gently on its leaves, and a mild breeze whispered through the meadow. The grass swayed in soft waves, brushing against one another with a quiet, soothing sound. Far away, birds called from the wall of trees that surrounded the field. The sprout turned its 2 leaves toward the warmth and looked around as best it could. The meadow seemed enormous from so close to the ground. The grass rose above it in places, and every blade cast a thin shadow across the earth. Beyond the meadow, the trees stood in a wide ring, their trunks small and dark in the distance, and their leafy tops blending into one another. The sprout felt very small. It was still studying the world around it when a single drop of rain struck one of its leaves. The sprout trembled. A second drop landed beside it, followed by another. Within moments, rain began to fall across the meadow. It tapped against the grass, pattered on the soil, and gathered along the edges of the sprout's leaves. Then the gentle rain became a rushing curtain. Winds swept across the open field. The grass bent low, and its 2 leaves shook beneath the force of the storm. Water splashed against the earth, filling the air with the smell of mud and fresh rain. The sprout could only cling to the soil and wait while the world roared around it. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the storm passed. The rain softened to a few scattered drops. The clouds drifted apart, and sunlight spilled across the meadow once again. Water glistened on every blade of grass, sparkling whenever the breeze moved through it. Although the storm had frightened the little sprout, the rain had quenched a thirst it never knew it possessed. Its roots drank deeply from the damp earth, and its leaves slowly lifted toward the sun. For many days, the sprout lived quietly beneath the open sky. Each morning it woke to the warmth of the soil and stretched its 2 leaves toward the light. It didn't know what it was supposed to become, but it enjoyed the feeling of growing. At first, its stem rose only a little above the grass. Then it grew taller, and the 2 leaves widened until they were nearly as broad as the sprout itself. A small bud appeared between them. The sprout felt something shifting inside its stem as though the earth were gently urging it onward. One morning, the bud opened. A 3rd leaf unfolded from the center of the sprout and reached toward the sky. It was smaller than the first 2, but it gave the young plant a little more height. From above the surrounding grass, the meadow no longer seemed quite so enormous. Every day the sprout discovered something new. The breeze became its first companion. It arrived without warning, brushing softly against the leaves before rushing through the grass. At first, the sprout tried to remain perfectly still whenever the wind passed. It held its stem stiff and straight, afraid of being pulled from the ground. But the wind always returned. Soon the sprout learned to bend with it. Its leaves fluttered, its stem curved, and the rushing air made the meadow sing. The sound traveled in waves, beginning at the edge of the field and rolling toward the trees. The sprout began to look forward to the wind's arrival, even though the breeze never stayed for long. As the days passed, another bud appeared above the third leaf. It slowly opened into a fourth leaf, broader and darker than the others. The stem thickened beneath the growing weight, and the sprout rose above more of the grass around it. It was still small, but it no longer felt quite so helpless. The sprout also began to notice the sounds of the meadow. Birds called from the distant trees, answering one another from branch to branch. Insects hummed through the grass. Crickets chirped beneath the afternoon sun, while small creatures rustled through the leaves beneath the trees. The sprout listened carefully, hoping one of them might speak directly to it. Sometimes it mistook the whispering grass for a voice. Sometimes it thought the wind was trying to say its name. But whenever it looked around, there was no one there. As the weeks went by, the sprout continued to change. Its stem grew thicker, and a fifth leaf unfurled from a new branch. Then a sixth appeared above it. The leaves were no longer tiny and delicate. They spread outward, catching more sunlight and casting shadows over the earth below. The grass that had once towered over the sprout now reached only partway up its stem. From its growing height, the young plant could see farther across the meadow. It could see where the grass grew thickest and where patches of bare earth formed narrow trails. It could see birds landing near the trees and shadows moving beneath the branches. With each new leaf came a stronger desire to understand the world beyond the field. It wondered what lived inside the trees. It wondered whether the wind came from there, and whether something might be waiting beyond the meadow. Sometimes when the air was still, it imagined it could hear voices hidden among the distant branches. One afternoon, a rabbit wandered near the sprout. It moved quietly through the grass, its nose twitching as it searched for something to eat. When it reached the young plant, it stopped to nibble at the grass and lifted its head. The sprout held perfectly still. It was afraid that even the smallest movement might frighten the rabbit away. The rabbit's ears turned toward the distant trees. Its nose twitched again. Then it stepped closer. For one quiet moment, the rabbit stood beside the sprout. After a moment, it brushed against the plant's lower leaves and continued on its way. The grass whispered as it disappeared, and the soft thudding of its feet faded into the meadow. The sprout was delighted. It had spent so long believing it was alone that the brief encounter filled it with hope. From that day forward, it watched the field with greater curiosity. It no longer saw the open land as an empty place. It saw paths where animals traveled, shadows where birds rested, and countless stories unfolding just beyond its reach. The sprout kept growing. A new branch formed near the middle of its stem. 2 fresh leaves opened from it, followed by another pair higher up. Its roots spread deeper through the soil, anchoring it firmly against the wind. Its stem became strong enough to remain upright even when storms crossed the meadow. The little plant was no longer hidden among the grass. It stood clearly above it now, green and full, with leaves reaching in every direction. Still, as the sun disappeared each evening, the sprout felt a quiet emptiness. The wind came and went. The birds called from the trees. The rabbit sometimes passed nearby, but it never stayed. The insects hummed through the grass and vanished into the darkness. None of them belonged to the field in the way the sprout did. None of them stayed beside it through the night. The sprout began to wonder if it would always be the only one of its kind in the meadow. It wondered whether it was meant to grow alone, surrounded by creatures that would always come and go. Then, one night, the air changed. The breeze that usually moved softly through the grass became cold and restless. The leaves trembled against one another, making a dry, nervous sound. Above the trees, clouds gathered across the sky and covered the stars. The sprout looked upward. Thunder rolled far away, low and deep, shaking the earth beneath its roots. The wind grew stronger. Grass bent in long, sweeping waves, and branches groaned along the distant wall of trees. The storm drew closer. Rain began to fall, first as scattered drops and then as a rushing curtain. Water struck the leaves and streamed down the stem. The sprout bent low against the force of the wind, gripping the earth with its roots. Lightning flashed across the sky. For one bright instant, the entire meadow appeared. The shining grass, the dark trees, and the trembling shape of the young plant. Then darkness returned, louder than before. Another flash split the clouds. Something dark moved through the sky. The wind carried a small seed across the open field. It spun helplessly through the storm, tossed from one current to another. Sometimes it disappeared into the rain. Sometimes lightning revealed its tiny shape as it rushed closer. The sprout watched, its leaves shaking beneath the wind. The seed came nearer. Then the storm released it. The seed fell through the rain and struck the earth a short distance away from the sprout. It bounced once against the damp soil before settling into a shallow patch of mud. The rain continued to fall. Thunder rolled above the trees, but the sprout could see the seed resting there, small and dark against the wet earth.